I am back to talk about the basics of DCOMS, which is District's Committee on Ministry, along with the Board of Ordained Ministry and their procedures for candidacy through the Texas Annual Conference Administration of the United Methodist Denomination. I am Catherine Moore. I grew up within the Texas Annual Conference Administration of the United Methodist Denomination. My father was John Chester Dowden. My mother was Grace Dowden. My father, John Chester Dowden, was an ordained clergy in the Texas Annual Conference and was employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration. He was also a child molester. And I met with Bishop Huey in 2010 about my father, but I had repressed memories that I had yet to deal with. In 2017, I obtained a recorded conversation with my mother where I directly asked my mother, Grace Dowden, this was before she passed away in 2018. In 2017, I obtained a recorded conversation with her where I directly asked her if she drugged me with codeine, a narcotic, so that I would not know that my father was molesting me. And her response was, yeah. She was boastful about it, and there was no remorse in her admission. There were no signs of remorse. My father passed away in 2012. The last conversation I had with him was over the phone. I would say in 2010. I cut him off shortly after that. And when I confronted my father over the phone, there was no remorse. My father never had any remorse for what he did. And if he were alive today, he still would not have any remorse for what he and my mother did. And I married an abusive man and the reason why I married an abusive man, Carl Edward Anthony, is who I married, is because that was all I had ever known. And I did not know what was normal. I lived with domestic violence in the marriage. He put me through legal abuse, and we were in a custody trial for an entire week. He made false accusations. One of the false accusations he made is that I dropped our youngest child on his head twice. One time while we were married, I had our younger son strapped into I didn't strap him in. I had the tray in, and I had forgotten to strap him in, and he was leaning against the tray, and I thought he was fine. I had done it so many times like other parents, and the tray gave way and he fell. I took him to the ER immediately. They did a CAT scan. There were no findings. He was fine. There were no injuries. And CPS was never contacted. He was an infant at the time. And in 2016, after the divorce, I had stopped at a furniture store to get a refund on a couch because I needed the money as a single parent. And I had grabbed my toddler. Kevin was a toddler at the time. I grabbed him out of the car and I went to step down. As I stepped down, I went down to the ground. I landed on my knee because of the momentum. My toddler, Kevin, fell back and the back of his skull hit the concrete. I called 911 immediately. They said, he seems okay. We can let you go if you want. I said, no, I want to take him to the ER to get checked out. We took him to the ER to get checked out at St. Luke's Vintage that night. And Carl Edward Anthony showed up with our older son and had to be escorted out by law enforcement because he was harassing me and being abusive. And he refused to go and get my SUV so that I would have a car seat for Kevin, because I was in the ER with Kevin that entire night. They transported us to Texas Children's in an ambulance. and I was in the ER the entire night with Kevin. And I had to ride back in the cab of a car, a taxi, um, home in the back seat without a car seat for my toddler who had a skull fracture because Carl Edward Anthony wanted to be verbally abusive and had to be escorted out of the ER. So during the custody trial, Carl Edward Anthony lost his shit. He lost his cool. And I was calm the entire time, but apparently being calm is a symptom of a mental illness. And so my ex-husband was not calm on the stand. He blurted out that I dropped Kevin on his head twice. And he told the court that I was mentally ill. A psychiatric evaluation was never ordered. And it was after I lost custody that I went through 2 psych evaluations. And one I passed. The other, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. During the time of the custody trial, just before the custody trial, I had been consulting with 2 attorneys. One was Harrison Fisher, and I was consulting with Harrison Fisher because he had handled a legal case out of court. There was a settlement with a woman named Alicia Provost Whitfield because she was sexually assaulted by Kendall Graham, who was employed by the Texas Annual Conference Administration. So the Texas Annual Conference Administration has a repeated history of employing clergy who are capable of serious harm. And that is why I am here today to expose that. During the custody trial, my family law attorney was Elsie Martin Simon, who also grew up in the Texas Annual Conference. Elsie Martin Simon and Harrison Fisher had known each other over 30 years because they were both attorneys in Harris County, and also because they were both United Methodists and had attended congregations that were under the Texas Annual Conference Administration. And Harrison Fisher, from what I understand, what I was informed of, had been employed at one time as a local pastor under the Texas Annual Conference Administration. So the fact that he represented a woman who was a sexual assault survivor from the Texas Annual Conference, from a clergy from the Texas Annual Conference, was actually unethical, and it was a conflict of interest. But I very seriously doubt that Harrison Fisher divulged that to Alicia Provost Whitfield. And Harrison Fisher, from what I was informed, is that Harrison Fisher was also mean and verbally abusive and mentally abusive to Alicia Provost Whitfield, just like he was to me. Harrison Fisher had warned me that the Texas Annual Conference would retaliate, and they would assist my ex-husband, Carl Edward Anthony, in getting our kids away from me, and they would tell the public, if the media were involved, that I was mentally ill and not capable of caring for our kids. Now, I didn't understand at the time. It didn't make sense to me, because it wouldn't make sense why a multi-billion-dollar administration would overstep and interfere in a family custody case and say that I am mentally ill when I am a sexual assault survivor. And clearly they have a history of employing clergy who are capable of great harm. So who are they to make any judgments or assessments on anyone's mental health? And that is not their purpose. They would be overstepping their bounds. But they're a multi-billion-dollar administration, and clearly they are above the law. So eventually it made sense. Elsie Martin Simon had represented me. She had also, for my family court case, and she represented me because of who I knew in the conference. We knew a lot of mutual people. She represented me pro bono. And I knew I was very knowledgeable about the Texas Annual Conference, which I'm sure interested her, and she probably wanted to know how much I knew. And so she had also warned me to be careful speaking out against the Texas Annual Conference before my custody trial, that I didn't know which legal officials were involved with the Texas or associated with the Texas Annual Conference. I didn't understand at the time because I was exposing corruption. I was exposing their history of employing child molesters. Because, I mean, honestly, that's not really my type of thing. It might be something that the Texas Annual Conference is into, but it's not really something that I am into. So, the Texas Annual Conference likes their sexual assault victims and their sexual assault survivors to be silent. And they will retaliate against any sexual assault survivor who speaks out against them. I know this because I experienced multiple forms of retaliation from the Texas Annual Conference. I was also forced into the Domestic Relations Office supervised visitation based on false accusations by my ex-husband. Eventually, I had to visit my kids at a United Methodist church that was under the Texas Annual Conference administration, which is the same administration that employed my father who sexually assaulted me. So I guess, according to my punishment, I should have kept my damn mouth shut, because clearly the Texas Annual Conference needs willing participants when it comes to their sexual assault survivors, don't they? So during the supervised visitation at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church, I was followed to the restroom along with other parents. I was also sexually harassed in front of employees with the Domestic Relations Office in front of my kids also. I was sexually harassed in front of the staff of St. Stephen's United Methodist Church, and no one did anything. I also reported it to Texas Annual Conference Administration, what was going on during the supervised visitations, because it was against the sexual ethics policy and also against the safe sanctuary policy. But the Texas Annual Conference clearly doesn't really follow those, because otherwise I wouldn't be here talking about it, would I? So I was kicked out of the supervised visitation because I was exposing sexual harassment. They made a phone call to me. They left a voicemail. They did not email me. They did not send me a letter. They sent my ex-husband, Carl Edward Anthony, a letter, but they did not send me a letter. They also did not file anything in court because they don't want to leave a paper trail. And they can't exactly tell the court that they're kicking me out because I was unhappy about sexual assault and sexual harassment. I'm not sure why I was supposed to be happy about that. I was supposed to be happy visiting my kids in supervised visitation while being reminded of the trauma that I went through. And apparently I was supposed to be happy about that. So I am going to get started on page 4. And this is the basics for DCOMS, which is District's Committee on Ministry. And page 4 starts with, in general, when interviewing candidates for certification, you are trying to determine fitness for ministry. Commissioning, you are trying to determine readiness for ministry. Recertification, you are trying to determine continued fitness for ministry and progress in completing theological education. Relicensing, you are trying to determine continued fitness for ministry, readiness for licensed ministry, and progress in course of study. In this resource manual, you will find a section covering each type of interview and listing the purpose and expectations for each. Each section includes simple steps to take before, during, and after each type of interview. However, the following guidelines apply to all interviews. Hospitality. A candidate or local pastor coming to meet with your committee for certification, recertification, or relicensing is a stranger in your midst and should be treated as the Bible teaches us. As the committee, you are the host, the candidate or minister is the stranger. You should extend hospitality. By the way, the Texas Annual Conference failed to divulge their history to the Domestic Relations Office that they have employed clergy who have sexually assaulted minors. And one of their clergy was convicted of murder and sentenced to 55 years in prison, and that was Michael Tabb. And I'm going to read an article about that after I finish reading this. Okay. Hospitality. A candidate or local pastor coming to meet with your committee for certification, recertification, or relicensing. Okay. I read that one. Number 1, reminding yourselves and your guests that the work you will do together is holy work. Take care to create a hospitable space. Consider setting up a simple altar space on the table with cloth, cross, and lit candles to represent God's presence among you. Consider sitting in a circle with your guest, not facing your guest in a line. Consider breaking your committee into smaller interview teams as necessary so that each candidate or minister meets with a small group of no more than 8 committee members. My question would be, how is the Texas Annual Conference assisting the Domestic Relations Office in supervised visitations by protecting children when they have employed clergy in the past who were sexual predators and one of them committed a murder? How does that work? How are they assisting the Domestic Relations Office in protecting children in the family court system when they are not being honest with the public because they didn't divulge this information to the custodial parents or the visiting parents? And why doesn't the Domestic Relations Office of Harris County care about this? It seems to me that if the Domestic Relations Office of Harris County has a responsibility to protect children in the family court system, why wouldn't they care about the fact that they're using United Methodist churches that are under an administration that has a history of employing clergy who are capable of causing great harm to women and children? Okay. Number 2, because you will probably meet with multiple candidates, one after the other, appoint one or more representatives of your committee to serve as host. A host should stay with the candidates waiting to interview with the committee, welcoming team, offering beverages and or healthy snacks, answering any questions, and making them feel at home. A second host or a candidate's home pastor or mentor should accompany each candidate into the interview, introducing the candidate and staying with the candidate to serve as silent advocate. If a committee member asks inappropriate questions, either the chair or host should feel free to invite the committee member to ask another question or to ask the question in a more appropriate way. because the Texas Annual Conference Administration would be experts on what is appropriate, wouldn't they? And the next is prayer. And it says, begin and end each interview with prayer. Yeah, I don't think prayer has anything to do with it, clearly, with their history. But that's just my opinion. Because Gwen Adams did tell me, who is over the supervised visitation. She said that any allegations of abuse from me are just hearsay and they won't take it serious. But any allegations of abuse from anybody else, they would take serious. And this was after I had contacted the Texas Annual Conference. So you can take everything I say with a grain of salt, because my knowledge and my experience, according to Gwen Adams, who is over the supervised visitation, including the supervised visitations at United Methodist churches, my opinion and experience is completely irrelevant, according to Gwen Adams. But that is against the law. And when I read the law on mandated reporters, I did not see the name Catherine Moore, and I didn't see the statement that any allegations of abuse from Catherine Moore are not to be taken seriously. Okay, so moving forward, I am going to read an article about Michael Tabb. And this article, let's see if I can get a name here. There's not a name, but I'll post the link. It's by MRT, and it says, minister accused in death of wife found with throat slashed. Okay. A minister was to have been in court Tuesday morning to plead guilty in the bludgeoning death of his wife, was instead found bleeding 3 wounds to the throat near a pond on the campus of University of Texas at Tyler. At 9 a.m. Tuesday, the attorney for the Reverend Mike Tabb and relatives of the minister's wife were in state district court where Tabb, 42, had indicated he would plead guilty, accepting a plea bargain that would send him to prison for 50 years in the August 6th death of Marla Tabb, 35. As a Smith County law enforcement officers were preparing to search for Tabb, police received a 911 call about a stabbing victim on the campus. So, Michael Tabb was a United Methodist minister who murdered his wife in 2003. And it was 2002 or 2003. Anyway, he murdered his wife in a United Methodist parsonage in Troop, Texas. Michael Tabb was employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration and placed on assignment by the cabinet of the Texas Annual Conference Administration. And he was placed on assignment at First United Methodist Church in Troop, Texas by the cabinet of the Texas Annual Conference Administration. United Methodist clergy are placed on assignment and are employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration, and they're placed on assignment in churches under the administration of the Texas Annual Conference. And this information is coming from someone who the Texas Annual Conference Administration has deemed mentally ill, because they are experts on mental health and cognitive well-being, I guess. Okay. Tab was taken to East Texas Medical Center in Tyler, where his attorney, F.R. Buckfiles, said he was undergoing surgery after losing a significant amount of blood. District Attorney Jack Skeen Jr. said Tab was in the intensive care unit, but is expected to recover. Officials said that during the ride to the hospital, Tab told emergency medical personnel he had been attacked near the water's edge by someone unknown to him. The Tyler Morning Telegraph reported in its Wednesday editions. Clearly, he was quite the liar. Skeen said he was treating Tab's injury as a self-inflicted wound. He said a witness reported seeing Tab hide behind a tree and flick a knife into the murky water. So I was living in the apartments in front of that pond during that time. In fact, I walked up and they were draining the pond. And I asked what was going on, and they told me that Michael Tabb had attempted suicide at the pond and threw the knife in the water. So they were draining the water so they could get the evidence. So his wounds were self-inflicted. Divers searched for a knife Tuesday afternoon. State District Judge Diane Devasto raised Tabb's bond to $1 million and ordered his transfer to county jail upon his release from the hospital. Tabb had been free on bond since his arrest in August for the beating death of his wife, just weeks after she gave birth to their second son. He had been living with his parents, who live near the UT Tyler campus. Tabb was indicted on the murder charge in January. At the time, he was pastor of the First United Methodist Church in Troop, Texas, about 20 miles southeast of Tyler. His wife's body was found the afternoon of August 6th in the master bedroom of the parsonage, where she lived with her husband and their 2 children. Tabb told authorities he discovered his wife's body after returning home with his 2-year-old son from errands. The couple's 6-week-old son was at the residence at the time of the murder, but was uninjured, officials said. You see, Michael Tabb murdered his wife, took his 2-year-old son with him to create an alibi, and left his newborn son there in the home with his deceased mother's body, whose life was taken from her brutally by Michael Tabb. In fact, what Michael Tabb may have been doing, he may have attempted suicide in hopes that he could throw off the investigation so that maybe they would look for someone else and they would stop suspecting him. But it didn't work out that way. I don't really think he really wanted to die. I think he was too chicken, because if he had really wanted to die, he would have succeeded. According to a court affidavit, Tabb told a 911 dispatcher that the front door of the residence was ajar and that his wife appeared to have been beaten with a baseball bat. An autopsy concluded that she suffered blunt force injuries to her head, including several wounds to her face and multiple breaks to her jaw. According to court records, an investigation by Troop Police, the Smith County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI determined that no valuables were missing from the home, but there were signs of a struggle. Investigators said traces of blood were found under the laces of Tab's shoes and between the sole and upper leather. Blood was also found on Tab's truck, investigators said. An affidavit said a missing leg from a wooden table could be consistent with the force trauma injuries to the victim. Court documents showed interviews with family and friends unearthed a strained relationship that included verbal and physical abuse. The family had been in troop only about 2 months at the time at the time of the murder. They had moved to troop from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, after Tab was honorably discharged from the Navy, where Tab served as a chaplain. Tab took a leave of absence from his pastorship following his wife's divorce. Following his wife's death. So, let me read this statement again. Court documents showed interviews with family and friends unearthed a strained relationship that included verbal and physical abuse. There were signs, and I knew there were. There always are. And because they were ignored by people in the United Methodist Church, the congregation of the Troop United Methodist Church, and people in the neighborhood, along with the Texas Annual Conference and probably the district, Marla Tab is no longer here to tell her story. But I am here to tell my story. And I am here to show a history of clergy who have been involved in committing crimes. And there is also a history of the Texas Annual Conference allowing clergy who have been accused of sexual harassment to return back to the conference. But if you are a survivor of abuse by a clergy who was employed under the Texas Annual Conference administration, you no longer have a place in their conference or in any congregation within their conference. They don't want you around. In fact, if you are a survivor of sexual assault from a United Methodist clergy employed under the Texas Annual Conference administration of the United Methodist Denomination in Houston, they will retaliate against you.